Okay, so a very good day to everybody. My name is Paul. I'll be your tour guide today for this session. Yeah, we're just going to jump right into it. I'll share my screen so you can see this week's presentation. We'll go from the beginning. There we go. Okay, this week we are looking at Southwark, and I entitled it CD Southwark because of a few of the various industries and entertainment and so on that went on back in the day and through the centuries. It's a bit of an unfair name nowadays, but it is a wonderful area to explore, and I hope through the course of this tour that I'll give you some ideas to go and visit Southwark whenever lockdown ends, and some of the things you can see and do. But today's tour, we're going to be looking at sort of London's first suburb, as I sort of classed it, and I'll explain why. The ownership, how it really developed and really sprung forward after the sort of Norman period, its development, and some of the gruesome goings on then regarding these forms of entertainment and what would happen if you were arrested in the area and so on and so forth. So we're getting very familiar with this map. Thank you, Google. London here in the center, and we'll zoom in, and we know this area pretty well. Now we've got the big River Thames snaking its way through. Uh, every single tour that I've done so far has been north side of the river, minus Canterbury. And in Canterbury, I did talk about a pub that was used by the writer Geoffrey Chaucer, and that was in the Southwark area, the Tabard Inn. But mainly, my other tours have included sort of the area of Pimlico, Chelsea. We looked at Mayfair, Soho, and we did a bit of Pall Mall around Buckingham Palace sort of area here. We did Fleet Street heading into the city of London itself, and we had a little look at the city from an architect's sort of point of view. So every time, bar Canterbury, we've been north side of the river, and we've also been to the west of the city of London. Now, I did allude to why this was the case. The reason is of the wind. Okay, the prevailing wind, as in the wind that normally direction, is blown from the west to the east. So that's the direction it would go in. Basically, this meant that if any industry was to set up and develop in the city of London here, it would travel the smells and so on to the east side. Okay, so that's why the eastern areas, the east end of London, which I'll do, I'm sure, in the future, was not the wealthiest area, not the nicest area. It's where a lot of the Victorian slums were, and prior to that as well. So all the rich, wealthy landed gentry started building to the west of the city. So that's how that developed. However, before anybody started to develop, Covent Garden in the 1600s, Mayfair in the 1600s, and Chelsea and so on around this time period, Southwark was already underway. So this is the area we're going to have a little look at. We'll just zoom in. We're going to focus around sort of London Bridge area. So I'm just showing you where the bridge is, and down to Tower Bridge. This actual area, this body of water, this stretch of the Thames, was known as the Pool of London. Okay, it was the docks. It was the lifeblood of the industry for goods and trade and so on. At one time, this was the largest docks in the world, and I'll explain why it went into a decline in the 1960s and 70s. So we'll have a little look at the Docklands area. We'll also check out Guy's Hospital, see about its development and so on. We'll then sort of look at the areas in the heart of sort of Southwark. So we'll be down at the river. We'll look at some of these forms of entertainment I was talking about. And then we'll have a little look at a palace, a former palace, and we'll talk about some crimes and punishments and so on. And then I'll end up in the area of Borough Market, which I can't highly recommend. It's been ongoing because it's an outdoor market, but I'll show you some pictures of that towards the end. The handiest station, if you're taking the London Underground to come and visit this area, is London Bridge Station, just here. So yeah, you can get to it on the sort of Northern Line and Jubilee lines. You've also got the City of London Pier. Okay, if you're taking the Thames Clipper, for instance, if you're at Westminster, you can jump on and hop off the ferry down at City of London Pier. Okay, there's another pier next to the Tape Modern as well, next to the Millennium Footbridge. So let's start at the beginning then. This is Roman London, Londinium. Okay. Roman London then established after Emperor Claudius' return, the Roman return to Britain around AD 43. Julius Caesar in BC 45 to 50 had tried a couple of times to come to the island, but was sort of uh, left unsuccessful. He wasn't able to get a stronghold. Claudius does. They settle and they create the town and the fort that would be known as Londinium. So you can see here that eventually they would set up their basilica. So this is Cornhill, where the Bank of England is that we looked at in the architectural tour, the Royal Exchange, and so on. The round is just here. That is the old amphitheatre, which you can go and see a little piece of as well. If you go to the Guildhall Art Gallery at the end of King's Road or King Street in the city of London, just go into the gallery. It's to the right of the square. Free to go into. You go downstairs, and it was a pretty impressive amphitheatre, to be fair. It would hold a third of the citizens of Roman Londinium whenever they had their big events and so on. So at that time, Roman Londinium sort of capped at about sort of 30,000 citizens at their height in the sort of late 4th century before they would abandon the city. But we've got London Bridge here across the River Thames, the only bridge to span the river from the time of the Romans until 1750 in central London. See, if you look to the map here where it says river, in between the I and the V, that's where the second bridge would go, Westminster Bridge. Okay, and that was in 1750. So from about AD 50 to 1750, 1700 years, one bridge. And as you can see, the Romans had taken over an old fort and converted it into their area. Okay, this area we know as Southwark. And that was because it makes military sense. That's the only reason. The River Thames was so important to get goods and troops and so on from the North Sea, from the estuary up to this point. Okay, because it was tidal. If you knew the tides and how they shifted sort of every 8 hours and you know the timings, you could get up and down very, very quickly. But if you wanted to expand south, it made more sense, bring all your troops to one point, Londinium, then set them off marching south and create a bridge so it makes it easier. They can continually walk across it. But if you do that, then you have to fortify the south side position. It doesn't make any sense not to, because if your enemy wanted to cut off your supplies and you don't have any sort of fortifications around this area, they'll just come along, set up a small encampment, and you've no way of accessing the bridge. So the Romans took both sides of the river, as most people tended to do, just for protection's sake. But we'll have a little look at this one. These images come from the Museum of London, and it's a great place to visit as well. It's free to go into, okay, right in the heart of the city, near the Barbican. When it opens, May 17th to May 19th, they're sort of playing about with their dates at the time, but when it opens, it's the largest urban museum in the world, and it tells you the history of London from before the time of the Romans, right up to present day and how it developed. So it's really good for extra knowledge as well. But we can see once again the basilica here. We're now looking across the Thames, and you get an idea of how wide the Thames used to be. Okay, and then you can see the river, the way it splits off around these little islands here. This is the River Fleet down here. We talked about the River Fleet when I was doing the Fleet Street tour, and it got covered over in the 19th century then. And this is Ludgate. So as you travel up modern Fleet Street, you come to Ludgate Circus just here. Then you go up the hill. There's a big church on the left now called St. Martin's within Ludgate. And then you just carry on up and you would arrive at modern day St. Paul's. And then you carry on through to the Bank of England and so on. So um, There's the London Bridge again. Remember, the only bridge. But yeah, we'll have a little look here because this is Southwark. Okay, so it's developed in the Roman period, and this little island here, this is Bermondsey. Bermondsey is now part of Southwark. Okay, it's one council now. But locals will still recognise the area of Bermondsey. You'll see signs for it and so on. But Bermondsey used to be an island, and we know that because of this book. Okay, this book that was created in 1086. Now it was commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1085, so that's why you sometimes see that date. But it was completed around 1086, and there were a couple of different versions as well. This is known as the Doomsday Book. Okay, there's a copy of it in the British Library, which you can see when that opens to the public as well. And it's in this book that we learn of Bermondsey. Say, Sey, was an old Saxon word for island. Okay, so Bermondsey was the island of Bermond. Bermond was a guy, okay, who leased the land from King Harold. Harold II, who was defeated by William the Conqueror in 1066. So 20 years on the throne, William the Conqueror decides to commission this census. Now, it wasn't a personal census, so not everybody on the island was listed. It was more to do with land ownership, what type of land it was. Was it agricultural? Was it used for stones, for quarries, livestock, that type of thing? You know, how is the money being generated so that he could get a scope of the whole island and know where to position his forces, which areas need protection from castles, and so on and so forth. So it has nothing to do with doom and gloom or that type of thing. It was just a way of William the Conqueror knowing how to organize the island then. So Bermondsey was this little island, and it's written about in sort of a very favorable light in the book. It's sort of talking about how the previous Saxon kings and queens and so on would use it like a sort of country retreat, that type of thing. They would sail down and have a nice hall and that type of thing. But we're going to look at Southwark here. So let me just go to our modern day map. Right. So London Bridge, we have London Bridge Station, and this is the old docks. HMS Belfast, just here. Hopefully those guys will get reopened again, but we're going to concentrate just here next to the Belfast in what is known as Hayes Galleria. So this is one of the most important docks and wharfs building here in the Pool of London. It was so busy that they reckon around 80% of dried goods that were imported into London came into this area. Okay. Now the buildings changed a couple of times, and I'll explain why in a moment. But this large archway, now this is pedestrianized, so you have a couple of nice pubs and restaurants here. But if we just sort of zoom in, then this is what you'd be standing in. So you see the way it's all paved over now? Well, this would have been water. Okay, this is the inlet. So the boats, the ships would have made their berths here. And then either side, you had the warehouses with loopholes. So this was cranes coming out of windows, and you would hoist the cargo up in and then store it in the various sections that it could be manifested and then shipped out or sold to various merchants and so on, but shipped out around the country. So this was a very profitable one. This building was sort of reworked by William Cubitt. We talked about the Cubitt brothers, Thomas and William, when we were sort of looking at Pimlico and a touch on Belgravia. They were the architects who made that development for the Grosvenor family. But it was all redone in the 1980s, part of the More London project. And this piece of art in the very center here is known as Navigators. It was designed by Thomas Kemp, and it's a kinetic piece of art, so it does move from time to time. So if you're ever around there with children and so on, they love seeing all the bits and pieces moving. Mr. Kemp wasn't so happy whenever they cleaned it up because they gave it this sort of very blue looking what's meant to represent the water, whereas originally it was meant to be very dark and muddy and so on. His point was sort of the industrialization of the shipping industry and all this type of thing, and it was a very hard business to run. And then this little archway to the right hand side, this would take you off into Tooley Street, which is just, if you go through this archway, pretty much right opposite you is London Bridge Railway Station. It's station I mentioned that you could travel into if you're using the underground or the overground if you're coming from the south coast. So yeah, it's a great place. It's now full of little shops and cafes and all sorts of things. So yeah, they're back up and running. It's great to see people in and around it. When I was down the other day taking photographs, but that was Hayes Wharf. Now the reason why it did change was because of this: a fire. London is no stranger to fires. Okay, 1666 in the city of London, the Great Fire, 2nd of September, destroys nearly 80% of the city, about 30 to 35,000 buildings. 1698, then, so 30 years after the Great Fire, the Palace of Whitehall, the largest English palace in their history, burns to the ground, all but one building, which is known as Banqueting House on Whitehall. In 1834, the Houses of Parliament, the Palace of Westminster, burns down. And then in 1861, this is what this scene is: the fire of Tooley Street. Okay, now remember, this is the Docklands, this is warehouses. I mentioned that 80% of dry goods came in here. Okay, you had all sorts of material. You had tobacco, you had cotton, you had all sorts of things. So there was basically a tallow, so wax for candle makers and so on. And there was a spark had been created, accident, and this fire starts to spread. Now, in total, it lasted for about 2 weeks, but the main blaze was a couple of days. But then buildings were still collapsing on the fallout from the original fire. More people died in this fire than the Great Fire of London. And the whole point was that because the fire spread so quickly, the fire brigade couldn't handle it, which brings us on to the next picture. So, oh, that's just a little plaque on the left on Hay Galleria explaining about the Great Fire of Tooley Street. So, this little building here in the center, this was the very first national fire station in the United Kingdom. Now, that was because prior to the fire on Tooley Street and prior to 1868, when the government nationalised the fire service, the fire brigades were ran independently via insurance companies. What they would do is you would pay a premium, they would give you a medal made out of metal, and then you would put that in a prominent position on your building, so that if a fire broke out, you contacted your insurance company, they sent their fire brigades round, and they would deal with the problem. They'd help or try their best to put out the fire. The problem was you had all these wharfs and all these warehouses in this area. When the fire started and was starting to spread, different companies were arriving, different fire brigades, and no one could tell exactly what buildings they were meant to look out for, look after, or where to start. So there's all this commotion, and therefore the fire continued to spread. Eventually, it was stopped and put out, but this prompted the government to pass the Fire Act Bill of 1861. Okay, they passed it in 1868, but that was the title of it, 1861, because of the fire. And then this building appeared then. So this was the first sort of national one. Then all the others would be converted and so on afterwards. This is actually now a little restaurant. Definitely check it out if you're in the area. It's quite nice. It's linked to a charity. So they help homeless people get work. And they train them in the kitchens or in the front of house and so on. Their menu tends to change every couple of weeks. It might change whenever they reopen 17th of May, but normally it would change every couple of weeks, which is quite exciting for a restaurant. And they have a strong emphasis on using British sourced produce as well then. So check it out. And I was talking about this building because of the relevance to the fire, but because it's in the photo there, just to the right, the modern building, the glass one with unicorn written on the top. This is a children's theatre. So this is where they run programs for kids to learn all the various aspects of theatre world. And then they put on productions and so on. There's a couple of famous actors who are patrons of this theatre, both of them Jude. So we have Dame Judy Dench is one of them, and a gentleman by the name of Jude Law. So they're both patrons of the Unicorn Theatre here. Right. So a little etymology. We all like origins, how places get their names and so on. And since I've been talking about it, I'll pick on Tooley Street. Okay, so Tully Street actually comes from this gentleman, and this gentleman is called King Olaf. Wait, what? How do you get from Olaf, or King Olaf for that matter, to Tully? That is a bit of a leap. Now, it's taken about, let's see, 1,000 plus years to get to Tully Street. But basically, what happened was you had the Saxons. Okay, the Romans leave, and the Saxons carve up Britain. Alfred the Great eventually unifies the four major kingdoms, and then a couple of centuries later, you get more kings. So we had a king who was running London, and his name was Ethelred or Athelred. And he was known as Athelred the Unready because whilst the Vikings were all over Britain, different areas, York, for example, Jorvik, and so on, and Essex was a big chunk of their land as well. They had been given different treaties signed by different kings from Alfred the Great throughout. But nevertheless, the Vikings, some would continue to raise, some would turn into Christians quite early on. And King Olaf here was a Christian Viking then. So his land that he controlled were the Orkney Islands up in the north, and obviously parts of Norway and Scandinavia. So he sides with Ethelred because a Danish jarl called Canute was making raids from the south up towards London. And Ethelred was known as the Unready because he wasn't a very military minded gentleman. So his sort of armies were sort of scattered all around, but north of the River Thames. So he asked for Olaf's help, and Olaf does. He comes down with troops, reinforcements, and engineers. And he said, look, the best thing we can do is actually pull down London Bridge. If we do that, then that will stop the Danish forces crossing the bridge and into London where they can make an attack. If they have to now start to try to cross our fjord, the River Thames, individually, then we can take them out. So that's what they did. They pulled down London Bridge and they were fine. But then Olaf, he goes away. It's like, fine, job done. And Ethelred obviously rebuilds the bridge, whilst the Danes are waiting on the other side, watching and looking and going, okay, thank you. So they rebuild the bridge, and the Danes come in and attack. And Ethelred is exiled to Paris for a couple of years, and then Canute will come on to the throne later on. So King Olaf here, when he passes away, then he's venerated. He made a saint, Saint Olaf. You get lots of their churches around Britain, and the street then that we're on, Tully Street, becomes known originally as Saint Olaf Street. So this becomes Stolaf Street, and then because they dropped the ain't of Saint, so Stolaf Street, then Stoley Street, then Tolley Street, and eventually, with our accents and dialect changes and so on over the centuries, it becomes known and is today Tully Street. So that's how you go from King Olaf to Tully Street. Right. So let's see. We'll go here next. So we're just down at Hayes Galleria on the other side of London Bridge Station. You can cut through the main station. It's huge. It's like the size of Wembley, London Bridge Station. And then if you get on to St. Thomas's Street, you would come in and you would see this courtyard. So horrible hospitals. Hospitals are not horrible. Okay, they are very useful and obviously very necessary part of our society. We're lucky enough to have the NHS. What I mean by horrible hospitals is the history of them, the way that they develop treatments and so on. So we'll have a little look at that in a moment. But this is Guy's Hospital. Okay, so this was founded by a gentleman called Thomas Guy, the guy on the right hand side. Now his statue is no longer there, and I'll explain about that in a moment. So here he is. So Guy was born in the late 17th century. He starts his professional career by selling secondhand books and then Bibles, and then he starts investing. And this is why his statue is not here anymore. He invested in what was known as the South Sea Trading Company. What they traded was human lives. Okay, so they traded slaves to South America. So it was very profitable, and he sells his stocks in the South Sea Trading Company just before the South Sea bubble burst. So that was essentially like a stock crash happening, the Great Depression and so on of the 20th century. So he makes a fortune when he sells his stocks. He made about, I think it was £175,000 in that one sale. That was back in the 1700s. So it's valued at millions, think about 23 million or so. So lots of money. So in 1721, he becomes the director of St. Thomas's Hospital. But he's very dismayed at the treatment of certain people at the hospital, or lack of treatment would be a better phrase, because he realized that people were being turned away. They weren't given any sort of treatment or any sort of care. And when he inquired about it, he was simply told they're incurable. So that would be people with cancer or any sort of fatal illness, or any illness that they didn't have an answer for and couldn't treat, they'd be turned away. So he decides to fund a new site of a new hospital right here where we're standing, and it takes on his name. So he begins the process in 1721. He would pass away in 1724, but now he leaves the hospital because he's unmarried and no children. So he leaves them over £250,000. And it was the single largest bequeathment of monies to a medical foundation in history. So they go ahead and set up the hospital. It becomes a teaching hospital, which is still is today. So you'll hear people talking about Guy's and Thomas's. So they're linked together under the same sort of medical board. They're all part of the NHS, but they are a teaching facility as well. So his statue was removed. It was created quite early after his death. The government spent, I think, £2,000 on it. It's been removed. I believe they've moved it inside, either into the chapel to the right where he's buried, or they've moved over to the science museum just to the left-hand side, part of the hospital building. But the idea after the Black Lives movement was made was to take the statues off the street and so on. So that was what they have done. So across from this hospital here, just across the street, on the same street, St. Thomas's Street, then you would have this building, which is a museum, and hopefully you guys will try to reopen as well. This is the old operating theatre. Okay, so this is why we get the term operating theatre, because inside it looks like this. Yeah, not your modern day operating theaters. It was literally a theater. So you had viewing stalls. Medical students would stand up here on incremental rises, and then the patient would be brought in and laid out on the tables, and the surgeon, the doctor, surgeon, would perform. So that's who performs surgery in the theatre. Hence, we still call it an OT, an operating theatre, to this day. And this before the sort of invention of modern anesthetics and so on, to be able to subdue people in a controlled fashion. So they obviously you'll feel some pain and upon recovery, but you're not experiencing as it was actually happening to you. Before that, it must have been a completely different sight. So especially if they're dealing with things like amputations and so on. So what they would sometimes do, we get young medical students to come in and apprentice with the surgeons. Okay, so they were once known like Victorian periods as apothecaries, and then we get the title of surgeons as well. One such gentleman who worked here, and he was a student of Guy's, was this gentleman. You can see by the book here, yeah, he was a poet. His name is John Keats. So John Keats came to St. Thomas's. To Guy's Hospital as a medical student. He lived not far away from the hospital. He writes about it. He says how pretty squalid conditions. He wasn't happy about it. And funnily enough, he was actually quite wealthy. He just didn't know it at the time. His parents had both died, so he grew up with his aunt and his uncle, who were looking after the estate, which was quite sizable, but they never let on to Keats. So he starts working in the hospital, studying, and they very quickly realize that he's intelligent, so they move him up and he becomes one of these apprentices. So he hates the sight of these guys and girls coming in and being worked on, and so he quits. He ends up being a poet, a romantic poet. The romantic sort of poet style, basically using nature as similes to express human emotions and so on. So I wrote things like Ode to a Nightingale and Ode to Autumn. He did like his odes. But he is remembered at St. Guy's Hospital. If you walk through that courtyard that we saw and into the back, you'll see two greens, one left, one right. And on the left side, you'll see Keats sitting down here in a lunar seat. This dome, this chair came from the old London Bridge. There's only a couple of them left. There's a couple over in Stratford near Victoria Park. But this one's here. And it was very tidy when I went there. Sometimes, if you walk through this area on a Sunday morning, you'll see Keats has been having a bit of a party. Yeah, there's normally a few empty beer tins or bottles lying around him from the students, but they do their best to keep it pretty tidy. But yeah, anybody can go on there. So it's not one of those ones where you see the grass. It's actually a really nice place to go and sit and have lunch, that type of thing. Right. So from the hospital down the bottom right hand corner, we'll take a little walk up and we'll head we'll have a look at a couple of buildings here that are linked. So we're going to go from one theatre to another. This plaque, right? So the first circle, you'll find this on Park Street. And this is exactly what an American gentleman found when he came to London in 1949. His name was Sam Wanamaker. Okay, he was a actor, and he worked with Shakespearean companies in America. Now, in America, it's quite common for them to recreate Shakespeare's famous Globe Theatre, that outdoor theatre with the thatch roofs and so on. So Sam, uh, who was a member of the Communist Party during the Second World War, which wasn't a great thing to be a member of if you were in America at the time. So he gets a bit of a black mark against his name, and he comes to England in 49. So he arrives looking to see this Mecca, this Globe Theatre of William Shakespeare, the actual original one. He's all excited, and this plaque's all he finds. And it was attached to a big wall at the time because it was a brewery. So he is a little bit dismayed, and he goes off on a challenge for himself, he sets, to try to build a Globe Theatre in London. Okay, if you go to this area on Park Street, you can go up behind the plaque, and there's a little viewing platform. And if you look down, you'll see the letters for Globe. Okay, so the Globe Theatre. This is actually the original sort of rotunda's foundations. They discovered it when they redeveloped this area. It used to be a brewery, then it was redeveloped and turned into social housing. But here's William Shakespeare. Oh no, wonderful piece of street art under one of the railway arches just down the street here, next to the Anchor pub. So yeah, this is what Sam Wanamaker envisaged, and this is what was completed. Now he started this program to rebuild the globe in the 70s. And he had to go through so much red tape and so much opposition from locals and landowners and so on, because they all thought, what's this American going to do? Is he going to make this Walt Disney-esque style, attraction? We don't want that here, But he kept promising, no, 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 it's going to be as true to the original as we can possibly make it. So they used Elizabethan building techniques plus Elizabethan materials. It's one of the only buildings in London that has thatched roofs. Okay. A couple of modern changes to it. It's sort of hard to see here, but there are these little spikes at the top, and they're simply sprinklers. Okay, you'll notice them when you go down and have a look. You just look up, you'll see them sticking out of the top of the building. But that's because thatch, history of fires. Yeah, sprinklers make sense. So Sam finally got the go ahead in the early 90s. So 1993, I believe, he was there to witness the foundation stone being laid, our groundbreaking ceremony. He passes away sadly in 1994, and the theatre itself opens in 97. To everybody's amazement, it is one of the most popular theatres in London. They all thought it was going to be a novelty thing. And it's like, no, the West End's still going to capitalize. This makes a lot more money in normal conditions than many of the West End theatres do. Also, one of the cheapest tickets can go from £5 up to sort of £35 if you're going to see a show. And they do it in the old way. of if you want to be a groundling, so you want to stand right there next to the stage, be thick of the action, that's a cheaper seat. Now, if you want to go up into the bleachers to the seated area, then it gets more and more sort of expensive. But £35 is what they typically cap at. His daughter became chairperson of the board, Zoe Wanamaker. She was in a sitcom My Family, Robert Lindsay. And she was also in Harry Potter. She's the one who teaches him how to fly a broomstick. So yeah, it's got great history, and in the wintertime, they've got the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, which is just behind it, which is typical even in Shakespearean days. You know, you had the open air theatre, and then you would have an enclosed playhouse for the winter months and stuff when the weather wasn't so clement. Just to the right, just because it's sticking out like a sore thumb, that large chimney stack is the Tate Modern. Once again, they'll reopen at the next stage of lockdown easement. So that's your contemporary art, Andy Warhol and Salvador Dali and so on. Free to go into, a couple of paid exhibitions inside as well. But yeah, definitely check it out. Right next to the Globe Theatre. Right, so the other form of entertainment that took place at the time of Shakespeare and afterwards as well was known as bear baiting. Yeah, the animals, the big bears. Bear baiting was a nasty sport. It wouldn't obviously happen today in the UK. They would often defang or take out the teeth of the bear and declaw them as well, and then set them against not humans, but set them against animals, dogs typically. And people would bet on it. So this is back where we saw the globe. They've got a couple of displays you can go and look at. Here they have encircled this, but if we zoom in, they actually say bear baiting, which this wasn't. This was the Globe Theatre, actually. They've circled it correctly because they're talking about it, but they've got this bear baiting up. Um, the bear baiting one was actually over here. Okay, so just zoom in where they've called it the Globe. So yeah, it was common. It took place. The flags were actually to announce when a show or a fight was about to begin. They did it at the Globe and the Rose Theatre, and they also did it for the bear baitings as well. There are streets around this area that are still called Bear Baiting Avenue, Bear Bait Street, and so on. Just linking back to that part of history. But yeah, not a great sport. But that's what people were into at the time. Okay, so if we take a little walk down the riverside, which you can do, it's completely pedestrianised. You can walk from Battersea, really, all the way down to Tower Bridge, pretty often right next to the river. So we'll just take a little walk down here and talk about liberty. Liberty to most means freedom. Liberty, in the sort of 14th centuries and so on, meant freedom to create laws. It was if you owned the liberty, then it was your right to create your own laws and so on, as long as they didn't contradict anything from the church or the crown, the sorry, religion. So this liberty was the liberty of the Bishop of Winchester. Okay, so here's a photo. I was down the other day. They're doing some renovations on the old palace. All we have left of it is really one end of the wall. And up here, you would see this rose window. This is an artist's impression that's on a wall just opposite. But it'd be up here. I'll show you what it would have looked like in a moment. So this was originally sort of founded, the Winchester Palace, back in the 12th century for Henry Le Bois. So let's have a little look at what that great hall would have looked like. So it was a part of a complex, but this is the great hall for banquets and so on. There's the rose window. They had the cellars down below for all the produce, and the kitchens would have been there as well. So the first Bishop of Winchester was created by our for this gentleman, Henry Le Bois, and it was from his brother, King Stephen. So this is a time known period in England known as the Anarchy, when King Stephen's fighting against his sister Matilda, who some would put in the Queen, the Kings and Queens list. Some obviously don't. But yeah, the Bishop of Winchester then becomes very, very key to the king as he appoints him the treasurer. Okay, so he's got to look after all the finances. Now, Winchester, you can get there from London in about an hour and a half by train. Beautiful place to go to, by the way. And But obviously, the bishop who had to deal with the king all the time didn't want to stay in squalor or whatever, or didn't want to continually travel back from Winchester to London and then return back in the same day. So Winchester Palace was born, and it would remain a palace for many, many centuries. Then it was destroyed. So I'll show you that in a moment. But it was also the liberty the of Winchester and the Bishop of Winchester, and he was set up businesses, and one of those businesses um, was the prison. So this is a photograph, sorry, an out of focus photograph of what is known as the Clink. Okay, so this became sort of the very first prison. Yes, you had the Tower of London for the king, and he would imprison people there, and so on and so forth. Castles dotted out throughout the land would have prisons, but this was the first sort of privately ran one. And it wasn't nice. Of course, it wasn't nice. It was pretty much precursor of debtors' prisons. So if you broke the rules laid out by the Bishop of Winchester in this area, so his liberty, then you could find yourself in the Clink. Now, this is a recreation, okay? It's a museum, very interactive. They've got actors and so on down there. So you pay a bit of money, you go in, you learn about the famous people who were imprisoned there and so on. But what is, well, noticeable here is, well, one, you have a gibbet up here. So yeah, normally after you died, after you've been executed, your body would be put up in a cage like this. Sometimes when you were alive, and then you were left to starve, and then you're pretty much used as a warning to other criminals. The original Clink would have had cellar windows like this, very small, but what prisoners used to do was throw out their hands onto the street and just beg for money because they had to pay to get released. Okay. That's the only way they were getting out in most cases. And there was also then people who worked the area pretty much for the bishop, or the bishop allowed them to operate, and they would pay him a cut for the purposes, taxes essentially. And if they didn't pay or they did something to annoy the bishop, then yes, they could be put into the Clink as well. But to earn money, this group of people would actually be allowed to leave the prison and go out and earn in the hope to pay off their debt quicker to escape the prison itself. Uh, so they were known as the Winchester Geese, prostitutes, essentially. Uh, Ladies of the night, sex workers, as they would be called today. And yeah, they were fully operational all around this area and would pay money to the bishop and to the liberty. And if they defaulted, they could end up in the Clink as well. So no one was safe. And they would operate in the bars and taverns and so on around this area. Now, whenever it was eventually destroyed, then we had that one sort of wall left and the old cellar. Um, that style of prison sort of changed a little bit over the centuries. So I'll show you that in a few moments. When we go from here, sadly the ladies of the night, the Winchester geese, when they died, this is the other thing. Even though they were working essentially for the bishop, they were not permitted to be buried on consecrated or in consecrated ground. So ground that had been blessed by a priest, for example. So that meant that they would have to go somewhere else. And that's our next stop then. So if you just sort of walk pretty much straight down Park Street again, then you'll come back up to the main road. You'll see a railway bridge above you, and you keep going down this Red Cross Way. And this green area on the right hand side is known as Crossbones Cemetery. This is a cemetery where, for many, many years, this is where all the prostitutes would end up. And it got so overcrowded that people sort of reported that arms and legs were sticking up. They weren't burying them with any respect, not giving them each 6 feet of soil above them, that type of thing. By the Victorian times, it was also used for paupers, so poor people. Anybody who couldn't pay to afford to be buried in a church cemetery would end up here as well. The local council have tried on a couple of occasions to redevelop the land and so on, but an outcry came from the local community. And if you go down, you'll see this big railing. There's an information board to the left of it if you want to learn a bit more. And you'll see it's constantly having flowers attached to it and photographs and so on. So a way of remembrance. They have put a garden inside, sort of like a wild garden, and they've also planted some herbs and so on. Now, if you just look, you'll see various um, memorials and so on, like this one as well. So that's unfortunately where those ladies would have ended up then, right up until sort of Victorian period. So we'll go from that. We'll go to another link to a prison. Now, when you see this, it's not a prison; it's a church. This is St. George the Martyr. St. George the Martyr has a big link with a writer who keep popping up. I swear, if you walk through London, there's not an area where this gentleman hasn't either drank in a pub or lived or had some sort of connection to. So this is St. George the Martyr, which is attached to a prison called Marshall C. Debtors Prison. And here's a little hint. Right next to the church, just across the street over to the right, is Little Dorrit Court. And that's all because of their gentleman, Charles Dickens, on the left. So when Charles was growing up as a young boy, his father used to work for the Admiralty, actually. He worked in the payroll office. But at the end of the sort of Napoleonic Wars, when they sort of all ended in 1815, there wasn't a need to have a fully functioning navy, and you didn't need so many people to pay, and so on and so forth. So Charles's father lost his job, and this is while they were living in London. And basically, he ended up in what you call a debtor's prison as Marshall C. So yeah, Charles went on to write Little Dorrit, and he based a lot of it on his experience with going to see his mother and father, a couple of sisters, I think, because everybody depended on the main breadwinner, the father. If he owed a debt, which he owed a lot of money, they would go in with him. Charles was, I think, about 12 years old when this happened, so he was already working, making a boot polish near Covent Garden. And so he didn't have to go into prison, so he was earning. But he wasn't earning enough because in the prison, I'll just throw up an image of what it used to look like. In the prison, you had to pay for everything. Okay, you had to pay if you wanted a bedroll to lie on. You had to pay for every meal that you ate, all your water and so on. Yes, you had to pay. So Charles was struggling. He wouldn't have made enough money. Eventually, I think the story goes that his maternal, so his mother's mother, his maternal grandmother passed away, leaving Charles about £400, I think, and he used that money to get his family out of the prison. It's one story that floats about there. But he used his inspiration with seeing his family here and the situation and so on, and that created the character of Little Dorrit then. And it's also why, because he had such a rough time being separated from his family and he was working in abject poverty as well, why he went on to be such an advocate with like the Earl of Shaftesbury and so on child labor laws and stuff like that, trying to reform how the Victorians perceived, just because you're a kid, you shouldn't have to be a breadwinner as well and get them into education and so on. So Charles Dickens has lots of links around this area. If you go into the George Tavern, um, which I put up in one of my other tours, I hope. Yeah, it's behind his uh, behind the bar. I think you have the letter of his life insurance that he used to pay off a debt or to insure a debt one time. But yeah, he used to drink in the George and possibly the Tabard where Geoffrey Chaucer drank before he where he set the Canterbury Tales in there as well. Right, to finish then on a modern note, something that's really nice for people to come and see. One, one of the oldest food markets in London, Borough Market. Now, this used to be situated on the other side of the tracks. I think it moved here in 1300s. So yeah, it was a really great place, or it is a really great place for food. I'll just show you a few of the images. So this is how you'll find it when you go down. So it does have bars and restaurants, so built in permanent ones, and then there's permanent stalls as well. So they open. Originally, it was a wholesalers, and it still is in a way. If you go down there before sort of 10 o'clock, you can't actually get in unless you're like a restaurant or something, you're buying wholesale to sell on, as it were. Then, after sort of later on in the morning, 11 o'clock onwards or so, it opens to the public. And then on a Saturday, their big market day, it'll run till about 6 o'clock normally. So yeah, it's a really good place. Here's just another couple of images. And yeah, I put up this one. This is a pub, the Globe. Um, it's just one when I'm walking around here, and sometimes people recognize it, and they recognize it from an odd thing. It's from a movie, Bridget Jones's Diary. So when they were filming that, her apartment was up here, and yeah, we check it out. If you watch that movie again, you'll spot it straight away. Okay, so that's the end of the Southwark tour. I had a couple of other things I wanted to put in, but yeah, I think I've taken up enough of your time. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing you at the next tour. The next one after this will be on Canary Wharf, and then I think I'm going to be finishing after Canary Wharf. I'll give you guys a bit of a break from me. So yeah, we've had what 8 or 9 of these tours, which have been fantastic. Raised a good bit of money. We're up to nearly £700 for the RNIB, so that's fantastic. Thank you as always. And yeah, until next time, enjoy the rest of your week, and see you on Sunday.